Welcome to our podcast, Resilient Heroes, where we are dedicated to showcasing the incredible journeys and contributions of women in the field of emergency management. I'm your host, Laura James. Welcome back to Resilient Heroes, the show where we shine a spotlight on the women making a difference in emergency management. Today's guest has spent more than a decade connecting government, nonprofits, and communities, making sure that when disaster strikes, no one falls through the cracks. She's the emergency manager for human services at Pinellas County Government, chair of the Florida Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, better known as Florida VOAD, and the driving force behind collaboration between emergency managers and volunteer agencies across the state. She holds both the Certified Emergency Manager and Florida Professional Emergency Manager credentials, has led state-level coordination in disaster response, and is now pursuing her doctorate in Fire and Emergency Management Administration at Oklahoma State. Her work is a true testament to the power of relationships, trust, and service. We are so happy to have you. Please welcome Jessica Geib. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Now, Jessica, you've worked in state government, local government, and in the nonprofit sector, and now you lead human services emergency management for Pinellas County, and you chair the Florida VOAD. What drew you specifically to the intersection of emergency management and not-for-profit and volunteer coordination?
Sure. I think when I started, 25 years ago, emergency management wasn't, an academic field. And so
Exactly.
I knew then, really just by watching Red Cross, some of our other partners, the Salvation Army, do the work that they do in other disasters, I knew that's where I wanted to head. And so because I didn't know what that path looked like, I ended up undergrad majoring in social work. And so it was sort of really that natural connection of the work that nonprofits do. And I really put kind of a disaster lens on studying in undergrad. And then I was able to kind of move forward with that social work mindset and intern with the American Red Cross. And that kind of, laid out the path for my career. It's been interesting. Yeah, it's interesting now that I'm in a human services department for local government. I've seen, with my experience with national nonprofits, local nonprofits, and even really state emergency management, how all of those pieces have really tied in to being able to tie our two worlds together so that we can respond and recover stronger here in Pinellas County.
And you said, you early on you volunteered. Was there an organization, was there a moment early in your career when you saw just how powerful volunteer organizations are in disaster response? I mean, as emergency managers, we consider not-for-profits and, volunteers tools in our toolkit. But was there something that really showed you how powerful those organizations can be for our communities?
Sure. You think about your nonprofit community is really your responders in your community all the time, right? They're touching those most vulnerable people who really rely on services. And so when you add a disaster on top of folks that are struggling as it is, it really amplifies the need for the nonprofits to be strong. And so being able to plug into that, to be able to see, this is really the boots on the ground work. This is really where kind of the rubber meets the road. You're giving someone a hug. You're giving someone a hot meal. It's that side of emergency management that makes it real, right? It's all about the people. And so if as emergency managers, we don't constantly kind of remind ourselves that what we do is about the people, we miss the point of the work that we're doing. And so I think it's really neat to pause. I try to, when I can, if I'm on a disaster, and I'm, with my government lens on, go out into the field and spend a few hours with a nonprofit partner. It will change your whole perspective. It will motivate you to keep going, kind of give you that burst of energy. Because again, you're reminding yourself, this work is about the people. And so I think it's a really unique privilege to be able to do that.
Thank you, Jessica. That is 100% true. And I'll share, sometimes here on Resilient Heroes, we often give advice to others. And one of the things that all of our Resilient Heroes say is the most rewarding part is connecting with the community. And that will lead you into the positive direction in your life, whether that's in a career or just in your personal life. Those connections can be life-changing.
Absolutely, and there's so many opportunities. There are so many good nonprofits, both big ones that we think about, but also little local community nonprofits that need our expertise, our insight, our assistance in helping them prepare their organizations, but also our assistance in helping them respond, and for sure our assistance in helping with recovery in the community.
Exactly. So I've noticed in your socials and watching some of your presentations over the last year since I've known you that you often highlight the importance of trust, and that nonprofits hold the trust of their communities. And that's a responsibility that you personally don't take lightly. Can you unpack that for us and tell me a little bit about why trust is a central theme in everything that you do?
Sure, the first thing you think about when you think of a disaster for most people who aren't in our world is what can I do? Where can I give my dollar? Where can I donate with a trusted vetted source? And how do I connect? And that's where the trust comes in, right? Our government is really who's organizing and leading the response, but oftentimes the government doesn't have the flexibility to really bring in people's donations or to be flexible in how they push those donations out. So that trust is so important for our nonprofit community because that's where the people, right, can use their donation to help assist. I think it's important with trust also is the transparency part of it. And so being able to say, this is where your donation is going. This is who your donation is helping. And I also think the other part of that is here's where we messed up. Here's where we can do better. Here's how we're taking the things that we did during this disaster, looking at it through that after action lens and saying, here's how we're going to do it better next time. And that's how you continue to build the trust. I think the other part of the trust is just the trust with those that we work with, right?
Yes.
I lead a team when we activate of, hundreds of workers who go and staff our shelters. It is not lost on me that sheltering is difficult. And oftentimes it's staff that maybe works in an accounting office or, is a public works staff out on the street.
Yes.
So they're
out of their element. Yes.
Exactly. We're asking them to go and help people who, one, are scared or nervous, right? Who are incredibly vulnerable, who oftentimes may be under-resourced. And so as you can imagine, that environment gets pretty hairy and stressful. And so it is critical for me to know and for my staff to know they can trust what I'm telling them. They can trust that if there's a problem, they can come to me. They can trust that I have full confidence they can do that job. So I really try to be intentional on building trust on all of those layers that I work in, so that folks feel like they're supported, they're backed. What I'm asking them to do is valid. And we've worked through those challenges and we're going to come out the other side better.
And you mentioned a little bit about using that sort of after action or, post-recovery time to review what happened, that, and we all do that as part of our after action. But knowing that trust is such a big part of what you do, have you run into challenges where that trust maybe have faltered during a response? And how do you rebuild that as part of, because you have this roster of people who, you may be calling on again in 2 months. And you and I know that your business is back to back. The hurricanes don't wait for your team to recover and get some rest. So how do you rebuild the trust? How do you deal with the difficult response? And when that has to do with the people within your organization and then the people within your volunteer community, how do you manage that?
Sure. Yeah. I think it goes back to that transparency. After we activated last year here in Pinellas County, we got hit with three hurricanes, Debbie, Helene, and Milton. And Helene and Milton were 10 days apart. So it was a pretty difficult time. Yeah. And we're right at the 1 year anniversary. So it was really a difficult time for our staff. We asked a lot of them. And I know many of them also, were personally impacted, and yet we're asking you to please continue to show up and work long shifts, under some pretty stressful conditions. But I think what we also tried to do post-impact, and we still are continuing as we're in long-term recovery, is really taking the time to listen to our staff, to build that trust back in cases where maybe they don't think we did the appropriate job, or they weren't happy with, how things went. So we've hosted a lot of staff listening sessions. I can tell you they get a little uncomfortable sometimes.
They do.
Yeah, but we and we have to continue to remind ourselves as leadership, we're not on the defense, right?
No.
This is an opportunity for folks to feel they can be open and honest. So we've hosted a lot of those staff listening sessions. Again, took all of that information and really, weeded through what are things we can change, what are things we can't change in the cases where we can't implement change, why, how are we communicating that to our staff? We also, we issued surveys to staff. And the other unique thing, and I think I'm really proud of Pinellas County for this, is we have normal times, blue sky, a behavioral health focus through so many of the programs that we offer. It's a priority for our leadership here. So the beauty in that is that we get to implement that same perspective into how we do disaster work, both response and recovery. So we've done a lot of, kind of resiliency seminars, de-escalation seminars, staff resiliency seminars. For all of our departments, certainly not just limited to the human services or the emergency management folks, but we've really been intentional to bring in partners who can offer those opportunities to kind of, again, rebuild that confidence, rebuild that trust, rebuild that transparency. The other thing that we offer, I think that helps, and this kind of goes into the trust, but, really into how we're constantly evolving our programs, is we bring in licensed clinicians into all of our disaster risk shelters. That's a twofold thing. One, that's for our clients who are in there so that they can, tap into our mental health resources, but also for our staff. And we've seen time and time again where, opportunities where someone may be heightened, instead of just pulling our law enforcement partners to assist, we can de-escalate through behavioral health techniques, and then we don't have to, Baker Act someone or remove them. So we've really seen a lot of success in that. So again, I think building that trust incorporates that behavioral health component, that transparency component, that owning up to what didn't go right component, and really the open door that folks can share with us, how their perspective was, opportunities for growth for everybody.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Jessica. And for some of our listeners, I know that's a lot to digest. And I'll say that because for many of us, we don't have, I'm going to say opportunity, but that's not the right word. But I guess it is. But as you said, last year, you were back-to-back storms with 10 days in between. And really, I mean, your particular organization has had the opportunity to have many years of experience that many of us don't have. We just don't have the number of emergencies that allow us to build the programs that you have built, which is great and not great. It's great. It's great for you. Not great for you, but great for us. So for me, for example, coming from Ontario, Canada, and watching you speak and hearing, your experiences and how you folks work. And, I've asked you to perhaps speak to some of the teams up here, because you have had the time, you have had the incidents, and you have had the support at all the levels through pain and over the years to put together programs that are really working, and then build upon them and share that foundation for others across the country. And so for listeners who don't know, I just want to talk a little bit about Florida VOADs. It sounds like another acronym, and all of us in EM have a bazillion acronyms, but I want you to talk a little bit about what Florida VOAD is and what under your leadership has happened. That it is really a model for collaboration, training, long-term recovery and support. And the structure that you have put together is successful year after year, and it's continuous improvement. And you certainly don't hold it close to the chest. You have been very open about saying, I'm happy to share my experience, across the world, because you guys have had such immense opportunity, boots on the ground to do this for your communities. And the lessons learned are fantastic. And you have not shied away from saying, I'm happy to be the voice if others want to learn from our experience. So talk to me a little bit about that and what the VOAD's all about and how it coordinates with government organizations, and just kind of share some of that structure for our listeners who don't have that in their communities.
Sure, yeah. And I just want to, again, I'll constantly be going back to this is why the heartbeat of your nonprofit is so critical, and why the VOAD is so critical here in Florida and certainly nationwide. So the Florida VOAD, again, it's an organization really that's a collaboration. We're really proud that we have well over 100 members. That was a goal of mine to get our membership up. And they range everywhere from our national partners that many are familiar with, the Salvation Army, Team Rubicon, down to our local county emergency management agencies, our local county VOADs or COADs. We have 47 long-term recovery groups that are active in Florida here. Yeah, and many of those are members. And then, of course, it's our local nonprofits, right? Our local United Ways, our local 211 or crisis, centers. So we really have a wide range of who's involved. We're constantly reaching out, trying to think of new partners to bring to the table. And you mentioned it, we do consider it a privilege that we've had the opportunity to exercise and test what works and really probably more importantly, what doesn't work for us.
Yes.
And that's why, we don't hold it close to the chest. I can remember it was during, I believe we were recovering from a hurricane, and that's when Hawaii had their wildfires. So we were sending them documents that we had created that they could use to stand up some of their resources. And then last year when Helene hit, it impacted Florida first and then North Carolina. We were sending North Carolina support to stand up their multi-agency warehouse while we were responding. And again, it's because don't learn while you're crawling. If we've learned and we have the documents or the resources or the tools to use, let our mistakes be to your benefit.
Exactly.
And I think it all goes back to too, and I know everybody talks about this in emergency management, but it's the relationships. Again, the more that you know how each other works, the bigger the trust that you have between each other, the stronger that you can continue to push yourself as an organization. And so again, because we exercise so often, we respond certainly so often, but we also train so often. I think one of the things that makes the Florida VOAD so unique when we talk to some of our other counterparts is the assistance and the support we have from our state and our local emergency management agencies. We get calls all the time. How did you do it? What are your tips? And I think it didn't just happen overnight. It certainly didn't. The Florida VOAD celebrated 35 years this year. So it's been a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, a long partnership. But it's showing up to the table, right? And I say that all the time. It's VOADs need to be at the EM table. EM needs to be at the VOAD table. And what happens is we're speaking the same terminology, the same words, right? But we're using different terminology for it. And so we've got to understand what it means when, an EMA is asking for this, what it means when a nonprofit is saying we responded by this. And the better we can understand each other, the better the collaboration can happen. And so again, that's sort of how we've been able to grow. When the state of Florida activates, one of the best practices that we have is essentially the VOAD kind of just folds right into state operations, and most people don't even realize that anything has changed. We partner very closely, with Volunteer Florida, who is the governor's of Florida's arm for volunteers and donations. They actually take over the administrative piece of the VOAD so that, one, our members can focus on each of their organizations and the work they're doing, but two, it provides that consistency that we need, that someone is running the calls, someone is taking the notes. Also, we're getting information directly from the State Emergency Operations Center. And the biggest piece of that, which is the biggest success, is that our nonprofits now have a direct voice to the governor's office. And so there is someone saying, here's what, here's what the feeding numbers look like. Here's what this organization is doing. Here's what that organization is doing. And that's how we've been able to, one, show the value of our work.
Yes.
Build that trust, and then also, receive resources directly from our government partners, which we know is rare, but that really enables our groups to be able to provide longer services or spend some additional dollars into recovery that they may have spent in response.
Thank you for sharing that. So as you said, 35 years, I mean, that's a long time. What I'm going to say is you very much lead in a servant leadership type of fashion, and you are 100% open to sharing at any point. And so I'm going to just ask you at this point of the podcast, I usually ask at the end, but I have seen your work. I understand what you do and the value of that. And so I know, Jessica, that you're open to sharing with folks and, whether that's documents, advice, just chatting with folks who are in an incident. So I'm just going to put it out there that if somebody has been inspired by something you've just said, that you're open to connection.
Absolutely. And,
Okay.
if I'm not the right person, I'm happy to connect you with the right
That's
person.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to go move a little more personal for you now and move into a little more personal conversation. You've been involved in some massive events and operations. We've already chatted about the hurricanes, but, we all lived through the pandemic together. And I know that was something, obviously that was on your plate as well. But I want you to sort of think back through your career and, is there something that really has shaped you in the way that you've lead today in your career? Is there one sort of response or one moment that you look back on and think that helped guide me to where I am today?
Sure. I don't know if it's necessarily one response. I've worked, lots of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly they all have different highs and lows. I would say probably what's guided me most in my career is the same mentor I've had since my very first job out of college. My first job was with the Red Cross, like probably many emergency management professionals, and I was lucky enough, and it's pure luck, honestly, that my executive director was just fantastic. She was willing to take a chance, trust, and also very open and transparent about asking questions, connecting to resources, sticking her neck out for me times maybe she shouldn't. So that's definitely shaped my career. Her girls I watched grow up, and now, they're also in the field of emergency management. So it's really been a unique and special opportunity to be involved with her. The other part of that is, especially when I was starting out, I took every opportunity and advantage I could to learn. I think when I do a lot of mentoring with students in universities coming out, and, I think they drive students to kind of pick where your spot is in emergency management, right? Like you love mitigation, you love business
planning. Yeah.
Right. But I think to be a good emergency manager, you have to understand all of the pieces and how they work together. Because again, no matter where you end up, like I mentioned earlier, you're pulling pieces from your career into making, your program stronger with where you're at. So, taking advantage of those opportunities through multiple different events, even when it was, a weekend or I had already, put my shift in, just learning, being open to learn, being open to experience different things. If I could think back really to one event, we work a lot of hurricanes down here, but I think for me, a unique event was the Pulse nightclub shooting that occurred in Orlando. And I was with the Salvation Army Florida Division at the time. And we had a really unique perspective in that we were the only nonprofit at the protected scene providing respite to the responders, the detectives, the investigators. And so it was a really small, closed scene. We were just simply doing feeding, really, and some emotional and spiritual care for those folks. But, it really put it into perspective that we think so often of response through a hurricane lens, but this was so different. And really, again, it came back to the people. And so being
Mm-hmm.
able to serve, whether that's a disaster survivor who's lost their home or a detective that's having to work a really tough case like the Pulse nightclub shooting,
Yeah.
just being able to use your skills to serve in that way.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to hone in on the theme there, which is really, don't say no to opportunity when it knocks at your door. Because as you've sort of said, we now that EM has become a field, and we can have an undergrad degree, a graduate degree, and a PhD. You're right. We are very much siloed into what makes sense or what's attractive to you. But in my experience, sending folks out into the field changes their perspective and makes a better response organization. So while you may be most comfortable in a planning section in an EOC, you really need to get out and make those connections, because it will change the way that you respond. It will change the way you see the world, and every one of those interactions. I really think you sort of said it. You guys are responders all the time. You're used to severe weather response, but when you are open to a different response and you're there, it changes you, and it changes your response for the better in the future. And so I really like that message. It's one that I think we should push to all of our resilient heroes, because we can be comfortable in where we are at any stage of our career, but sort of pushing beyond the bounds to say yes to something, or do you have the capacity to add this one thing to your plate? And it could be very much life-changing for the way that you organize your mindset for emergency management moving forward. So thank you for sharing that, because you have a million examples to choose from, but that was a great one there.
If I could just add too, I
Yeah,
think getting in the field opens your eyes to representation that's different than you.
I
And what
agree.
I mean by that, an example, here is we spend a lot of time, because we have a very large homeless population. So we
Mhm.
spend a lot of time working with our homeless providers, our street outreach teams, to really learn from, what are the gaps? What are the needs? Who are we missing? And so I don't think we can call ourselves good emergency managers unless all of the populations in our community are represented. You can't do that unless you are connected to them, you're in the community learning from them, you're including them in your conversations. So again, I always try to be very intentional about who's not at this table, right? Who's missing in the community? How
Yes.
can we better learn from them so that we can do our jobs better?
And whenever you say that, I put my hands up and I go, yes. But I also know that we are met with a challenge, about who has the right to a seat at the table is a conversation that happens often. And so your perspective is exactly the way we need to move in some of those more difficult conversations, and here in Canada as well, which is why I think it's so refreshing for you to say that, and that your communities are embracing that, and that we can all learn from that, because I can tell you, I have sat in many EOCs and I have trained with many teams, and the seat at the table for that conversation is sometimes hard to
Fill, or
fill.
hard to
Yeah,
represent. Yeah.
yeah,
And, it all goes back to, and I say this a lot too, preparedness is a privilege for so many people.
it
We
is.
forget that. It's, oh, have a kit, know your evacuation plan. But when you're struggling to put food on
Mhm.
your table, you're not thinking about that. You don't have the capacity or the resources to think about that. And so again, that's why we need that representation at the table so that we better understand the privilege of the things that we're asking folks to do.
I love that, Jessica. Thank you. Now, tell me this. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice to like young Jessica, what would it be?
Oh gosh. You know, I don't know. I've never been looking for the next job or thinking about the next thing. It's always
Mhm.
just kind of been the next step, and I've been very fortunate that it's worked that way in my career for me. my kids, I have a senior and I have a 10th grader. So life is like really busy right now.
Really busy.
It would maybe be, do some of the things like finish your master's before your kids are in high school. I don't know. Don't start a PhD while you're trying to graduate your kids. But all of that I think is important too, because, while we're sitting at the kitchen table doing classwork together, they see the grit in their mom, right? They see that there aren't any limitations. And when something means something to you, it's worth the work. And so, we've navigated some of those tough times, together, where I've been deployed and missed things. All of that goes back to, if it matters, it's worth it in the end. So I've really tried to kind of just make that my motto, that, whatever kind of life rolls our way, we'll navigate it. And that's what builds your character too.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And you and I have chatted, and you were, for those who don't know, Jessica was one of our panelists at the Resilient Heroes panel at the Hurricane Conference this year. And we chatted on the panel about the privilege of being a woman in emergency management, and also some of the challenges. And I'm going to kind of roll this into my next question, because your education and background, but also that grit that you refer to, has really helped you move between different worlds that I think in emergency management, traditional, in quotations, emergency management, where many women weren't at the table, even in recent years, there wasn't a lot of that out of the EOC, out of the box thinking, and that those relationships weren't necessarily as strong as they could be. And I really think, watching you work and listening to you speak, that you're able to connect those worlds together, whether that's state agencies and county governments and nonprofits and faith-based groups. You bring those folks together. And I actually think that when I watch you, that is part of your persona of being a woman, and the ability for you to see the world empathetically and then figure out how to connect those that need to be connected. Now I'll let you respond and say that that's not the case, but that's what I see when I watch you, and when I hear you speak to other women and inspire other women. So do you feel like being a woman has helped you find that common ground where before in traditional EM we may have struggled?
Yeah, when I started, there were not a lot of women in emergency management. It was still, especially in Florida, a lot of folks that have since passed on and retired. So it was definitely more difficult. I think part of it was that, learning from everyone around you. So learning from the other women around you, but also learning from our other counterparts around, the men, and how they lead, and really deciding for myself what's important to me. And you nailed it when you said connecting with people, right? That's kind of what I always go back to, is it's all about the people we serve, but also the people we work with, and making them feel valued and important, whether that's a woman or a man, just ensuring that, we are intentional about building those relationships. Again, that trust. I can't ask you to go do something difficult if you don't trust me. And so, when we're not responding, I spend a lot of time, walking the halls with my colleagues, just kind of, shooting the breeze with them, because that's all part of building that foundation. I can tell you, though, going back to being a woman in emergency management, years ago, I was listening to, I think it was like a webinar or something, from several different women that had been in the field a long time. And this is really before we saw that shift. And one of the answers, like, I think about it all the time, that stuck with me. And they asked her, she was on the leadership team of the state emergency management. She was really one of the only women at the time. Like, how did you hold your own when you started? And, I think about this, and she said, I always was a step ahead, right? I always had to think about, if they ask this, what would the answer be? If that doesn't work, what would my answer be? So it was like she was always kind of working a little bit like quicker, right? Or thinking ahead, so that if someone did ask her when she had the opportunity, she was ready to go. And so I've always kind of thought about that, maybe that's the emergency manager mindset too, is, okay, what if? Okay, what if? What am I missing? Who else? How would I answer that? What if that didn't work? So just being prepared. And I think women are great at that because we're juggling so many things all the time, right? Like, what if this happens? What if my kids, forget their lunch, etc. But always kind of being a step ahead and thinking through what are the things I'm missing? What if they ask this? What if this doesn't work correctly? What is my answer?
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to roll that into my next question, which is really about personal resilience. And I know that you have spent years working back to back, and you mentioned, there are times where you're not home for birthdays or holidays and you miss things. And that's something that we all grapple with. And so do all of your volunteers and all of the organizations. But how do you stay resilient for yourself? Because all of that takes a toll. And I know that the work is very rewarding, but how do you slow down for yourself? And what kind of thing is in your daily routine, like blue sky days? And then how do you center yourself on those gray sky days that for you can seem endless when you've got back-to-back severe weather events?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the most important thing is surrounding yourself with folks that get it, right?
Yeah.
I'm incredibly lucky that my best friend is in the field and we've been friends for a long time. So we've been through a lot of these events together in different agencies. So having someone that I can just say, hey, this is happening and you don't have to unpack it has been tremendously important. My partner is also an emergency manager. So
look at you.
Yeah, that can get a little complicated, but I can tell you it's also really it's really amazing because, last year when we were both gone for a long time and we had that, couple of minutes to catch up, it was like, I get it. You're okay. You've got this, we're still eating, drinking, have some water. And I'll see you on the other side. So, that has been beneficial too, because again, it's somebody that gets it. As far as the day to day, I think, I like probably many people struggle with doing that, especially, life is really busy, but being again intentional about taking that time, even when you have it, this year, I like to pick a word of the year. And this year my word was gratitude. And I'm not great at it. So let me just say that, but I try every day or as often as I remember is to say, what is something I'm incredibly thankful for today, right? Whether that's something as simple as, your favorite meal or, something like, my son PR'd at a cross country meet. What is something I'm intentionally grateful for today? And they always say, if you think about, how thankful you are of something, it changes your mindset, but it really does.
It does.
I wish I could write it down every day and be that consistent. I think that'd be even better. But, baby steps, I'm working on that.
There you go. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's helpful. And for some folks, yeah, like that singular word can help you refocus your day or even in the moment. So thank you for sharing that. And listeners, I just want to share with you that I have met Jessica's bestie, and they are a true EM force. And she will be joining us as well on a future episode. But you two have really supported each other for years. And that's such a unique bond and friendship. And so what I would encourage those listeners who are going through school and early in their career to make a bestie, support each other through EM, because it really makes a difference to be able to call somebody or text them at 1:30 in the morning and say, it was a terrible day. And have them understand what you mean, and not need to do anything necessarily, but just get it, and you said your partner is very much that way. But when I watch the two of you play off of each other, it is a really unique and supportive relationship that I think, you're so lucky to have.
Absolutely. And, that's the thing, like sometimes women can be in competition with each other.
Exactly.
And really her success is our success, right? Like it's certainly never been like that. I'm incredibly fortunate. Again, we look at it through this makes the big picture better. And so I'm just really appreciative that she has that same mindset.
And we often talk on Resilient Heroes, and especially for those of us that have been around a long time, and you said it, you said the C word, competition. It does, and it can feel like that. And, I think one of the things that we're working on together as a community of women in EM is really to be more allies and partners and supporters. You're open to sharing all of your work. So many of us we're not holding our work to our chest. We don't identify the fact that we did this and it's our project. We identify with the fact that this is a great project or program and we want to share it with others to make it better. And I think as women, we're just so much more open to doing that with each other in the last few years, and watching that unfold for me at this stage of my career is just so amazing, because at the beginning it was a struggle. It really was. And I'm so happy to see just the information sharing and the caring. And I think, didn't you tell me that she sent you food one time?
We've sent each other lots of, sour gummy bears, donuts across the states, across disasters. I think I sent her a cheese platter one time.
See? Listeners, this is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of resilient hero that you need to be. I love that. And I think it is so important. I am lucky that my partner is in EM and understands, what a bad day can look like. But I think the more we can make those super tight connections, the better our whole community will be. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, because you mentioned I know that you love to share your work and mentor, and a lot of our listeners are probably early career emergency managers or they're students, and they want to, how do they get started? What should they do? What's the best advice you can give someone who is looking at the intersection of emergency management and community-based response? And I know you have mentioned, get out there and volunteer with an organization. Is there anything else that you think that they should do in order to, really get their hands in it, to be honest?
Sure. Yeah. And I love this. I do a lot of kind of career coaching for students. So it's right aligned with what I love to do. I said it earlier, and it's made all the difference for me as a mentor that took a chance on me. So when you're starting out, find yourself a mentor, and, it's okay to ask. In emergency management, especially, people are very willing, for the most part, to mentor folks coming into the field. I think it's just kind of part of, how we lead. And so find someone and, find them through LinkedIn, find them through an EMA agency. If you're not sure, reach out in different associations, et cetera, may be able to connect you. So I would say find that mentor that you trust, that you can bounce ideas off of. You can hear harsh criticism, when something's not right. They can look at your resume. They can coach you through interviewing. They can look out for introducing you to the right people. So, that right mentor really, I think, at least for me, made all the difference in my career, that she took a chance on me. And, I've worked hard to, kind of honor her my entire career, really.
That's amazing. And that's great advice. And what about, I'm going to say this because back in the day, I was this person. What if they are hesitant? I mean, not all of us have the confidence to reach out to someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, would you consider being my mentor?
Sure.
So how does somebody who just is, hesitant to do that, but they see an organization that they're really interested in, like, what's the best way to do it to get over that anxiety at the beginning? Because I think you are your personality, and you have shared that you're so very open, but I know that there are folks out there that are like, well, I want to do something in my community, but I'm afraid to ask. I don't know who to ask. I don't know how to go about it.
Sure. I mean, and this goes back to connecting with people, right? Like, people love to talk about their successes. And so if there's somebody that, you would really love to meet or to mentor you or to learn from, find out something they've recently accomplished, right? You can find out anything on the internet. Oh, great. I just saw, you just published this paper, reach out to them on LinkedIn, and your connection is that paper, right? Find whatever that little connection is and open with that. People love sharing about the things they worked hard on. So that's like kind of that easy, low-hanging fruit to make that initial connection. I would say you could reach out and say, hey, I'm a student. I'd love for you to mentor me. But there's more impactful for you to say, hey, I was just reading, this research that you just completed, and I think it's really interesting, XYZ. I'd love to talk more about it. That's how you kind of put your foot in the door.
That is amazing advice, Jessica. Thank you. So, listeners, you now have your marching orders. Okay, Jessica, I've had you for over 30 minutes now. So we need to wrap this episode up, but so that folks have a little fun with you at the end of our interview, we're going to do a quick lightning round. Are you ready?
Okay. All right,
okay.
Maybe.
Okay. So I haven't done this before, so I'm excited. So just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. So one not-for-profit or VOAD partner who always inspires you.
Oh my gosh, there are a million. My favorite is the Salvation Army. I know I worked for them, but I've just seen the good that they can do. I've seen lives transformed, through a hot meal. Truly, it was my absolute honor to work with the Salvation Army. I was on their advisory board for a little bit here, but if I get a chance to ring a bell at Christmas time, at the kettles, or assist however I can, they do such incredible work in every community.
Thank you for that, Salvation Army friends. Coffee or tea during an EOC activation?
Oh gosh, Red Bull. I have to usually
Jessica.
detox. I know. I have to detox after an event because I drink too much Red Bull, and it's terrible. I know it. Or black coffee, but mostly Red Bull during an activation.
Okay. I'm going to advise against it, but all right.
I'm not a doctor yet, so.
You need a water chaser after each Red Bull.
Yes.
Listeners, she will be a doctor one day. Okay. One skill every emergency manager should have that isn't in a textbook or you didn't hear in a lecture.
Yeah. Public speaking. I had a great story when I was a freshman in undergrad. I had to take public speaking like everybody. And I was like, I absolutely hate this class. I tried to talk my way out of it every day. I was like, I told the professor, I will never use this because I hate it so much. And, I went back, and I graduated undergrad a long time ago. I was a keynote speaker at a big conference a few years ago, and I emailed that professor and said, you will never believe what I'm doing. And it was fun to be able to reach back out. But I use public speaking every day in some form or fashion. If you're not comfortable with it, make it your mission to become more comfortable with it, because the more you work on it, it's truly the better you get.
I could not agree with that advice more. And if that means, joining your local Toastmasters or something, absolutely, I agree. That's great advice. Okay, if you weren't in emergency management, what would you be doing?
Oh, I can't imagine not being, but I'd be at a nonprofit somewhere, I'm sure. Doing disaster work, not calling it that.
Yeah, of course. Okay, one word to describe the future of collaborative disaster response. You only get one word.
Oh, wow. I think hopeful.
I love that word.
Hopeful. And, we talked about right before you and I came on about the future and how things seem so uncertain, and, things are changing so quickly. But, history has had really uncertain, uncomfortable times, and we always come out on the other side. So I'm hopeful that when the dust settles, we'll be able to continue to do really impactful work, and keep making a difference, because we'll always have disasters. So we'll always need this work.
Jessica, thank you for your leadership and your vision and your dedication to building partnerships that last. To our listeners, remember, resilience isn't just about resources. It's all about relationships. And that's what Jessica has brought to us today. And again, Jessica is open to connections. We will link to her LinkedIn in our show notes. And Jessica, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Buffalo Computer Graphics. All content is for informational purposes only. Are you or someone you know a resilient hero and would be interested in contributing to our podcast? We would love to hear from you. Please contact us at RHpodcast@buffalocomputergraphics.com.